Hey everybody, it's Stephanie here. It's been a few days and I thought I'd pop in and say hello. How are you doing? So this video, if you've been watching, these videos are not makeup tutorials, and I want to make that clear right away because I am going to be applying makeup, but I am not going to be telling you step by step what I'm doing. So if you're looking for a makeup tutorial, this is not the place to find one. However, if you stay and hang out with me, we might have some fun. How's everybody doing? How is your October treating you? It has been raining like you wouldn't believe here. And just when I think we're done, the rain comes back. So it's been a very cold and wet October, but nevertheless, I still love Octobers. Fall is my absolute favorite time of year, and that will never ever change, probably. So today I wanted to talk about a subject that is a little heavy. It's pretty serious, and it is probably not one, if this is something you watch with your kids because they enjoy watching me put on makeup or whatever, this is probably not one you want to watch with your children. Just letting you know. We're going to be discussing some things that are rather mature, and you might not be ready to explain all of this to your kids. So just letting you know that up front. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I have talked about domestic abuse on this channel before. It is something I've written about frequently. If you've followed me for any length of time on social media, you know it's not really a subject that I shy away from at all. And I'm going to talk about it here today. I'm going to share my own experiences and what I've learned, and my hope is that as someone else is listening, you know, maybe they're wondering if what they're experiencing is domestic abuse, and maybe I can help clear that up for them. And maybe they're wondering what they can do, if they have the right to be bothered by what's happening and so forth. I really want to clear up some of that for them. My camera is doing something weird. Hang on here. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. It seems to be fine now. That was strange. Anyway, so before we begin the actual discussion, I want to define abuse, first of all. And I want to do that because I think there is a misconception about what constitutes abuse. Some people think that the only abuse that matters is physical abuse, and that is not true. There are all different ways a person can be abusive or can be abused. So I am using the definition as given by the Domestic Violence Hotline. Domestic violence, also referred to as intimate partner violence or IPV, dating abuse or relationship abuse, is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. So there are different ways that this can happen. This can happen to people of any race, age, gender, sexuality, religion, education level, or economic status. The victim or the perpetrator can be, it doesn't matter. The abuse includes behaviors that physically harm, intimidate, manipulate, or control a partner, or otherwise force them to behave in ways they don't want to, including through physical violence, threats, emotional abuse, or financial control. Multiple forms of abuse are usually present at the same time in abusive situations, and it's essential to understand how these behaviors interact so you know what to look for. I am going to include the link for the hotline in the description. So if you have questions about whether or not you personally are experiencing abuse, or if you notice in your own behavior that maybe you're becoming abusive, you know, you can reach out for help, whether you're the victim or the perpetrator. There are people to help you, because most people, I'm saying this, you know, hopefully, I'm saying this with a measure of hope in my thoughts, don't set out to be abusive. I would say that's probably true. Most people don't just decide one day, hey, you know what, I'm going to be an abusive jerk. Hang on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. So most people aren't like, you know what? If everything goes as planned, I'm going to be an abusive person. Most people don't start off that way. They start off with a lot of unresolved stuff, and it manifests itself in becoming an abusive person. So we're going to talk a little bit about my own story, how I came to be in an abusive relationship, how I got out of it, and what has happened since. So my story starts in 2008. In 2008, I had only just recently finished my cancer treatments. I was, still recovering. I still had a long way to go before I'd be fully well again. But in 2008, I was at a point where I really just wanted to move forward with my life. I was 32 years old. My life had been put on hold for the better part of a year because of surgeries and radiation therapy and so forth. And I was sick of being sick. I didn't want to be a cancer patient anymore. I wanted to move forward with my life. And being the good evangelical girl that I was at the time, I thought, what better way to do that than to, set a goal to get married and start a family. And it sounds really strange to people who didn't grow up in that culture to hear something like that. But you have to understand that in the evangelical culture, that is kind of a thing where, the expectation is that you will get married, you'll have a family, and that's considered normal. Anything outside of that, like if you're single for a length of time and you're happy that way, that's considered unusual and sort of a, well, not sort of, it's definitely a deviation from what they want from you. So back in the day, I thought that the best thing I could do for myself is, move forward in my life, get married, have a family, and I think part of me just wanted to pretend this whole thing just never happened. Like, cancer never happened. All the losses I experienced as a result of having cancer never happened. I was just going to move forward and life was going to be good. Now that, of course, made me very vulnerable. And if there's anything that abusers are really good at doing, it is finding vulnerable people and really learning how to manipulate their vulnerabilities. So there I was, 2008, thinking that I needed to get married and have a family. And because I live in rural northern Michigan, it's hard to meet people. And so it kind of thrilled me a little bit when on MySpace, I got a message from somebody who was local to me. And he was telling me how beautiful my eyes are and so forth, blah, blah, blah. And as it turned out, this was somebody that a friend of mine knew. And she vouched for him. She said he was a nice guy, that, she knows him through her daughter because her daughter's husband is related to this guy. And so I thought, well, that's good enough for me. I mean, this is somebody that my friend knows, and I'm good friends with this person, and certainly they wouldn't steer me wrong. They wouldn't tell me to interact with somebody who's not good for me. So he and I started talking pretty regularly, and things moved very fast because, again, having come from the culture that I did, that seemed normal. It was not unusual at all for people within my evangelical circles to meet and then within a matter of weeks get engaged and then shortly thereafter get married. That was not at all uncommon. So things moved along very quickly. I think about it now and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what on earth was I thinking? Why would I do that? But back then, it made perfect sense to me. So we met. We went on our first date. On our first date, I don't know how strongly, how to really get the message across that when you see red flags, you need to honor what you're seeing and believe people when they show you who they are. However, again, having been raised as I was taught, because I was taught to love an abusive God. Side note, I think that learning to love the evangelical God is the perfect setup for teaching people to love abusive people. It teaches them that they deserve the abuse, and they had it coming, and the abuser is actually abusing them for their own good because they're trying to make them a better person. So I learned to love abusive people and actually blame myself for the abuse by attending church for most of my life. So on our first date, when we met at a coffee shop and hung out there for a long time, then we went to a movie, and then we went back to the coffee shop. The coffee shop was right down the store right down the block. It was at a strip mall. We were, just down the sidewalk was a grocery store, and we thought, let's go get some ice cream and just come back here and eat it here. And I told him I don't like ice cream with chunks of candy in it. It doesn't taste good to me. I don't like the way it feels when I have to chew it up. I just don't like it. And I told him what I prefer, which at the time was not ice cream at all. It was rice stream. I was really going through this thing where I just wanted rice stream all the time. And he laughed at that and told me that no, I am actually going to get, it was a Ben & Jerry's flavor that actually had a hard shell of chocolate on the top that you had to break through, and then it had chunks of candy all through the ice cream. I didn't want that. I had made it clear that I didn't want that. But I thought, well, I'll try it, because I thought, again, I felt like, well, maybe I'm being unreasonable by not wanting to try something that he wants. And I did it. And I hardly ate any of it. And I think back on that now. And that was a huge, huge, huge red flag that I just ignored. I rationalized it. I thought, oh, he's just being funny. He's just trying to introduce me to something he enjoys. Let me tell you something. If on your first date, the person that you are spending your time with cannot respect you enough to even let you eat the ice cream you like, get away. Do not run, or do not walk from that person. Run from that person, because they are telling you right there who they are. If they can't even respect your ice cream choices, I can tell you right now, they're not going to respect much else about you. But I didn't know that at the time. I was still very vulnerable from having gone through cancer and everything that took away from me. I still felt like at 32 years old, I was behind where every other 32-year-old person that I knew was, and I was incredibly vulnerable, and he saw that, and he absolutely used that to his advantage, as abusers are known to do. But I didn't know that at the time. So, after that, I stayed in touch with him, and he started doing this thing where he would call me every morning. Now, keep in mind, I had just finished cancer treatments, okay? My body was still healing. He would go to work at like 6:30 in the morning. After we would stay up late at night and talk on the phone, because he didn't like for me to be the one to end the conversation. He wanted to end it. And, he would keep me up late talking, sometimes till the early hours of the morning. And then he'd go to bed for a few hours, and then he'd call me in the morning and tell me that I needed to get up, that I was going to make my body stronger by not staying in bed and resting. It was going to get stronger by getting up and moving and refusing to give in to my tiredness. That became an every morning thing. And if he could tell by the sound of my voice that I had just woken up just to talk to him, just to answer his call, because I knew if I didn't, he was just going to keep calling, he would actually get kind of mad at me. Now you're hearing this, and even I'm hearing this now and thinking, what was I thinking? Why did I think this was okay? Well, I thought it was okay because, again, having grown up as I did, I had been conditioned to love abusive people. I had been conditioned to believe that if someone is abusing me, like God did, it was for my own good. He was just trying to help me be stronger and do better. He wasn't trying to control my behavior. He was just trying to help me to expect more from myself. That was what I told myself. And that was what I kept telling myself. That was what I kept telling myself when I left my small hometown and moved 45 minutes away into actually this really cool place that I wish I had been able to go back to be honest. And he immediately demanded keys to my place. He would never leave me just to have any time to myself. If he was not working, he was with me. And if I was not working, I had a volunteer job that I really loved, and if I was not doing that, then I was to be with him. And then we reached a point where he thought the volunteer job was too taxing on me, so he told me I needed to quit that. He also told me I needed to quit selling Avon, which I was doing at the time, and because it wasn't making us enough money and it was taking up too much time and effort and so forth, and I needed to stop doing that and focus on us. I was so desperate for approval, and he saw this in me, and he absolutely manipulated that to his favor. In short order, we got married. Now again, this sounds wild to think about now, but you have to understand the culture I came from. These hurried relationships were not an unusual thing. They were actually fairly common. You know, it's not unusual at all to hear stories in evangelical circles about people who knew each other for just a few weeks, then got engaged, and shortly thereafter got married. That's very, very common. So even though I hear it now and I think, what in the world was I thinking back then, it made perfect sense to me. And again, having grown up as I did, I had been taught to love an abusive God. And so I could easily rationalize that the abuse that I was receiving, the emotional manipulation, the dismissive nature, the constant message that what I wanted wasn't valid and that, you know, he had better ideas. That was just normal because I heard that in church every Sunday, you know. So it made sense in my unhealthy frame of mind that a God who treats me that way would send a partner that treated me that way, and that I should be grateful. Okay, not just that he would send that person, but that I should be grateful for that person. It sounds wild, but it's a thing. So we got married, and I immediately regretted it. We were married for about 2 weeks when he said to me, he looked right at me and said, "You married the devil." And I thought he was kidding around. I'm like, no, I didn't. You're not the devil, okay? And he just looked at me very sober-minded, not a hint of a smile on his face. And he just said to me, "Just wait, you'll find out." And I was chilled. I could not believe what he had just said to me. As time went on, I began to understand very clearly why he said what he said. My days quickly became consumed with how can I keep him, or what can I do to keep from angering him? What can I do to make sure that nothing that I do makes him angry enough to start yelling at me and stuff? Because that was kind of, you know, the thing. It didn't matter really what I did. He was going to be angry about it. So I just had to find ways to keep that anger at a minimum. Now, I would also come to realize that prior to our marriage, he had told me that he attends meetings every week. And because I didn't know any better, it sounded to me at the time like he was going to some sort of like group therapy type thing, which I guess in a way he was. But after we got married, it became very clear what his meetings were actually about. They were, when he said he was going to men's meetings, I thought he meant meetings for men, like a group therapy type thing. No, men's means men exploring nonviolent solutions. And it was part of his probation for assault. I didn't know that. I was very naive about a lot of things. And I want to take a second and just say, if you're someone who has found yourself with an abusive person, And you're seeing all these things that you feel like you should have known, you know, that seem so obvious now, but somehow you missed them at the time. I want you to understand something. People who are abusive like that, they know that you don't know. And they know how to take that lack of knowledge on your part and manipulate it to get what they want. It is not your fault that the person who did that to you did that to you. It is not your fault for not knowing something that you had no reason to know. You know, I had no reason to know that men's meetings were actually for men who were on probation for assault and were court ordered to attend these meetings. I didn't have any reason to know that. And he knew that. And so he didn't clarify what he meant because he wanted it to be ambiguous. He wanted me to think what I thought, that it was a group therapy type thing. But it wasn't. And once I realized what kind of meetings he was attending, I knew what he meant when he told me, "You married the devil." And I was worried. So after we were married for about 7 weeks, I found out I was pregnant. Now by this time, I should back up a little bit. By this time, I was done. And I don't mean I was just done with the relationship. I meant I was done with everything. I did not even want to live anymore. My days had become a matter of survival every single day. Every day, I would hear that if I upset my husband enough, he was going to kill me. He would remind me every day that he knew how to kill people with one hit because of his martial arts training. He would remind me that when he was in Iraq, he was in the army, and he knew how to kill people with one shot from a great distance. He would remind me of this every single day. And he would remind me that he had people holding firearms for him because legally he could not have them in his possession. And that as soon as his probation was over, he was going to get them. And that if he ever felt like he needed to, he would drop me, whether with his hands or a gun or something. This is what I heard every single day. He also told me things like, if he ever felt the need to hit me, he would. And that if he did hit me, I would never get back up. He would tell me in these exact words, "I will lay you out and you will not get back up." And so that was my life every day. I hated mornings because mornings meant he was waking up. And the threats and the anxiety and the stress were about to get started, and I just hated them. And I remember one morning, he got up, he went into the shower, and I'm laying in bed, just, you know, wrapping my mind around the fact that it's yet another day where I'm going to be threatened and abused and made fun of and reminded of the many, many ways that I disappoint him, etc., etc. Being, you know, I'd be compared to other women all day long, so on and so forth. And I remember laying in bed, and I just, by that time, my faith was, you know, in the beginning stages of a sincere deconstruction. But I said, you know, God, if you're there, if you're listening, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And I don't mean I don't just want to do this marriage anymore. I don't want to do this life anymore. Life has been unkind to me. It's been flat out cruel this last year. Now I'm with a man who does not love me, and he treats me accordingly, and I'm done. And I said, you know, if there's a reason for me to stick around, it better show up soon, because I don't want to do this anymore. That's it. Shortly thereafter is when I learned I was pregnant. And that was when I also realized I have got to get away from this man. But how? Now, my situation is such that I had my own money. I had my own resources. So resources to get out were not an issue. A place to go was not an issue, because by this time, you know, my family was aware of what was going on. I had the full support of my family to do what I felt like I needed to do, whether that was to stay or go. They were going to be supportive. And I really, in so many ways, it was very lucky, because a lot of people, not just women, a lot of people in domestic abuse situations are in situations where they cannot very easily disengage because, you know, there are children involved. Maybe they are financially entangled with this person so deeply they can't walk away. In many cases, the abuser has isolated the person from the people who would otherwise be supportive of them, and they don't have somebody there to, you know, provide a safety net for them should they decide that they're going to leave their abuser. So in so very many ways, I was very, very lucky. I had everything that I needed to be able to get away. I just had to figure out how to do it. However, being the struggling, slowly deconstructing evangelical that I was, I really wanted to try to save things if I could. You know, I had heard all my life what a terrible thing divorce was. And I really didn't want to have to do it if I didn't have to. But, you know, I knew that if things could not work out with us, that I was going to, you know, I at least had somewhere to go. So I wrote him a letter because talking to him was too intimidating. I was afraid of him. I was too afraid to verbalize, you know, to speak what I was saying. So I wrote it down. And I gave it to him, and then I went out, and I thought I would have time to get back to the house before he did, and we could actually have a conversation about what I said. That's not what happened. For some reason, he got home from work early that night, and when I got home, he was there, and he was angry, and he refused to speak to me. And the reason he did that was because he told me, now you're going to see how it feels. You're going to know what it's like when I try to talk to you and you have nothing to say to me. Well, how does it feel? It doesn't feel too good, does it? And so he was punishing me rather than acknowledging that, you know, it was his behavior that kept me so quiet most of the time because he was scaring me. He decided that it was a good time to teach me a lesson about what it feels like when your partner won't talk to you. So he wouldn't talk to me about it. Would not talk to me. When he finally did start getting verbal, it was yelling, it was swearing, it was telling me that I could leave if I have to, but that I needed to know that he was going to come after me for the baby. And it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And this went on for hours. And I just said nothing. Because I felt like if I didn't speak, my odds of surviving were better. I was afraid. I was very afraid that he was going to just snap and do all the things that he had been threatening for weeks now that he was going to do. So I didn't say anything. I just let him go on and on and on. And finally he stopped. And I just listened. He was in the bedroom, and I just listened for a few minutes. And I went into the bedroom, and he was crying, and he told me he's sorry, he's a monster, you know, everybody thinks he's a monster, and, you know, wanting to survive as I did, I told him, oh, no, nobody thinks that about you. But that's what I said, because I was trying to survive. And I made myself available to him that night, just to try to smooth things over, because I didn't want him to know that my plan was indeed to leave the next day. So the next day comes. I am sweet as can be. He has no idea at all that if I can get away that night, I'm going to, and I'm never coming back. And it's worth noting that in his previous relationship, he and his previous wife had separated and gotten back together multiple times. And I had told him, if I ever leave you, if things are ever so bad that I leave, I will not come back. And he didn't believe me. So the next day he goes to work. And I know it's also a day that he has those meetings that I mentioned. So all day long, I'm doing the best I can to stay calm. I'm packing a few things that I know that I can take that are going to be, like if he were to come home for lunch, they would not be things he would notice. But they were things that I needed. You know, a few items of clothing, a few, you know, important pieces of paperwork, that kind of stuff. All the stuff, you know, and the paperwork and stuff, those were things that he left me in charge of anyway. He didn't want to be bothered with it. So I had access to all of that, and I could put it away, you know, safely, pack it away, and he would never know, because he just didn't want to be bothered with that kind of thing. So we had lunch. I did my best to pretend everything was fine. He came home from work. I had dinner ready. We ate dinner. We're watching a show, and he's doing his usual thing of making fun of the women on the show, making fun of their looks and so forth, as he often did. And then he left for his men's meeting. And I was terrified he was going to come back. So I waited a few minutes, and then I took the bag that I'd packed, got in the car, and left. I did drive around the block to a friend's house to talk to her and just make sure that I was doing the right thing. She was not home, and when I think back on it, that was a blessing, because she is somebody that has a very different mindset than I do, and I have no doubt in my mind she probably would have said, stay and try and work it out, because this is a very typical response from Christian people, particularly evangelicals, which she was and is. The response is usually stay home and try to work it out. You don't just throw away a marriage. So when I think back on it, I'm actually very glad that she wasn't home. So she wasn't home. I decided I'm going to go to the women's shelter and stay there for the night. I didn't try to contact him. I just went there, and I had been having cramping, so I went to the hospital to get checked to make sure everything was okay with the pregnancy, in which it was, thankfully. And I just stayed there and stayed safe for the night. Next day, I contact him first via email and then via phone, and I go to his place of work and we talk. He tries to tell me to come home. He tells me that I'm going to miss him too much and that I won't be able to do this, and I told him, but I will. And, we need some time apart. And I left. I went to my parents' house, and I was fortunate that they were very supportive of my decision. In the weeks to come, I would get multiple emails and so forth from him telling me how stupid I was, telling me that I was ruining his life, telling me that he's going to take me to court and tell the court that I'm crazy and he's going to take the baby from me as soon as it's born. This went on for months. I only saw him one other time after I left, and that was when I went back to the apartment to get some of my things, and he was there. And he tried to convince me to come home. I said no, and that was it. I never saw him again. I had been terrified, though, that as my due date grew closer, that he was going to show up in my life again. That did not happen. I was also terrified that, because I filed for divorce after I was separated from him for about 3 months, I filed for divorce because his emails and so forth made it abundantly clear to me that any claims that he was making that he was going to change and do better and so forth, it was not true. Because if you're trying to change and do better and not be an abusive person, you don't send somebody abusive messages. So, I filed for divorce. I did not get any help from legal aid because I had not been hit. And this is where the definition of abuse that we typically embrace needs to change. There are different forms of abuse, but because I had not been physically harmed, I did not qualify for any sort of help from legal aid to help me with my divorce. So I was doing it all myself. having never been in court. Well, I had been in court before for one thing relating to a friend, but that was a whole different thing. Regarding anything like this, though, this was all new to me. So I was upset that I couldn't get any help, but I thought that's not going to stop me. I'm still going through with this divorce, and I refuse to raise a child with this person. I refuse. I was terrified, though, that as the date for our divorce grew closer, that he was going to show up back in my life. And once again, excuse me, that did not happen. He was done. The funny, well, not funny, but the interesting thing is about, I don't know, 3 weeks or so prior to the date that our divorce was to be final, I had a dream. And I'm a big believer that our dreams talk to us. And they tell us things that either we know but just need confirmation of, or they tell us things we might not even be aware of. In my dream, I had, you know, in this dream, he was in his car and he drove south, as we often did, like when we went to see his parents or something. And he never came back. And I remember telling the victim's advocate, who was helping me the best that she could, just short of giving legal advice, about this dream. And she's like, oh, if only that were true. But these guys, they never go away. They fight for everything. You know, I wish that I could tell you that it's going to be easy, especially once the baby is born. But that's not true. I've seen this again and again. But for whatever reason, that dream just gave me a lot of peace. And as it turned out, I never saw him again. When our divorce, the date for the finalization of our divorce arrived, my son at that point was 3 months old. And sorry, got a little distracted. So my son was 3 months old. His father had not contested the divorce whatsoever. And I was granted I was given something that nobody gets. I was given sole physical custody and sole legal custody of my son. And that was the end of it. I never heard from his father again. I do wish that he had at least acknowledged his son, but that did not happen. My son's father passed away in 2012. He essentially drank himself to death. You know, my son's father was a veteran of the Iraq War. And he did not get any help at all when he got home. There was nothing available, or at least nothing he took advantage of, as far as, you know, debriefing and learning how to adjust to life as a civilian after seeing all that trauma, experiencing all that trauma. And I think that was something he lived with for the rest of his life, and I think that it really destroyed so many relationships for him. Be that as it may, I did not have to tolerate being the victim of his abuse. And that's one thing I want people to understand too. Your abuser might have gone through some really horrible things that are contributing to why they're an abusive person. You're not obligated to tolerate that. You're not obligated to, you know, be their punching bag, whether that's emotionally or physically or otherwise, just because they went through some bad stuff. There are resources available to help people who've been through bad stuff and to help them deal with it so that they don't end up hurting people they love. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, yes, my partner is not kind to me, they probably what they do probably would qualify as abuse, but they've been through this and that, you know, they were not treated well as a kid, whatever. That's not your job to fix them. And I'll tell you what, being there for them to abuse you is not fixing them. All you're doing is allowing them to remain wounded, to remain traumatized, and to take that trauma, and instead of working through it and processing it in a healthy way, by staying there and letting them abuse you because you think you owe it to them because of trauma they experienced before they even met you, you're enabling them to not deal with that stuff. So if that's your reason for staying, leave. Because they're not going to ever reach a point where they work through their trauma enough that they're going to stop abusing you, because what they're doing is abusing you instead of actually dealing with the problem. When I left my husband, I felt somewhat bad because I knew he had been through some things. I knew he hadn't had the best childhood, and I knew he was traumatized from his time in Iraq. I knew that he was carrying around a lot of his own wounds, and that those things were contributing to why he behaved the way he did. Fortunately, I had a lot of people in my life, my victims advocate at the resource center, at the Women's Resource Center being one of them, telling me, Stephanie, you don't owe it to him to go back and try to fix him. You know, he's a grown man and he has to take some responsibility for his own choices. And if his choice is to abuse you, then he has to accept responsibility for the consequence of that choice, which is you leaving, because you don't owe it to him to stay there to be abused. An argument that he used after I left, and that many abusers use, I think, is, you married me, you chose me, and you're obligated to stay because you made that choice. You're not. You might have chosen to marry someone. That does not mean you consent to being abused by them. And there's a big difference, obviously, between the choice to marry a person and the choice to, and the consent to being abused by that person. I did agree to marry him, absolutely. That was my doing. That was my choice. That does not mean that I consented to abuse. That does not mean that I consented to sticking with him even as he's abusing me. And that I will never, you know, I never consented to being there for him to abuse just because he had a bad day or he's got some shit he's never worked through. That was not my job. And it's not your job either. Now, I'm going to pause because this is getting to be a very long video. I'm going to finish up a few things, and then I'm going to come back with some final thoughts for you and some real talk about what life has been like since I left. It's not always rainbows and lollipops after you leave your abuser, but I will say it is always 100% worth it. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Okay, so I feel like I'm falling out of this. So yes, I got my divorce finalized. I got sole custody of my son. Never saw my ex again, and then life got interesting. Single parenthood is very difficult, and I think anybody who's been a single parent can acknowledge that. Because of everything that I'd gone through with cancer and then a difficult marriage and then single parenting and so forth, it became, I fell into addiction, which I had already been struggling with before I had my son, and then I fell right back into it after I had him. Fortunately, I was able to get clean, and I've been clean for several years now, but you know, it's important after you leave your abuser to get the care that you need to get better. Because for a while I thought, because I had not been physically abused, that I was okay. And it took me a long time to realize that the abuse that I had endured was pretty awful, and it left a mark. Even if it didn't leave a mark on my body, it left a mark on my soul. And it took a long time to realize that I was carrying around wounds that were really impacting the way I was relating to my son and the way I was taking care of myself, all of that. So I had to get some help for myself too, which I did. And I suspect that in some degree I'm still going to be healing from this experience for a very long time, because I think the words that someone speaks to you can sometimes hit harder than being physically hit. And I've heard that even from people who have endured physical assault, that the words hurt more. But the thing is, I refused to let my abuser continue to have that power over me, whether that abuser is somebody that I was married to or the church the religious tradition I came out of. I refuse to allow it to dominate my life. And I realize that's not always easy for people to do, that some people don't have the options that I had available to me because they don't have their own resources. They've been cut off from every person that could have supported them. They have nowhere to go. When people ask, why does someone stay? There are reasons someone stays. When I left, the night that I left, I went to a women's shelter, and some of the women had been there for months, and they explained to me that when they had been with their abuser had gone out of their way to essentially decimate all of their other relationships and really put a lot of work into cutting them off from any support they might have had outside of that relationship. And so when it came time to leave, they had nowhere to go. They had nobody supporting them. They had nobody to say, come with me, this is a safe place, you'll be okay here. They had nowhere to go. Some of them were there with 1, 2, 3 children and had been there in sharing a bedroom with another family for months. So it's not as easy as just pack up and leave if you're in an abusive relationship. And if you think that is, and you're shaming people who stay, then I would say that you need to do some reading and some research on why people stay, because it's not because they're too weak to leave. It might be because they literally can't. So my encouragement to you, if you've listened to this and you've found some of it resonating with you, is reach out for help. There are resources out there who can help you put together a feasible plan to get yourself and your children into a safe place. If it's just you, all the better. It's easier to get out if it's just yourself. If you're seeing red flags in your relationship and you are not, I don't care if you're engaged and you're supposed to get married tomorrow. If you're seeing red flags in that relationship and any of this that I've talked to you about today is resonating with you and sounds like the person you're about to marry or move in with or whatever, I don't care if it's supposed to happen tomorrow. Don't do it. You have the right to be safe, and you have the right to be with someone who loves you and appreciates you and would never do things that would try to control you and to make you feel like you are less than you are. I don't care if you're at the altar, you can say no. Nobody is going to, nobody has to live with the consequences of that choice but you, as far as whether or not you choose to move in with that person. Don't let pressure from other people put you in a position where you're having to make a choice that you're the only one that has to live with it. Okay? If you have any questions, if there was something that I said that rings true with you and I didn't get into it as much as you would have liked just to have clarity, I'm happy to talk about it. I am an open book. And the reason for this today is, some people have said, I've been told, you're a Wonder Woman. I'm not. And yet maybe I am. And maybe are so many other women out there who are in these situations, even if you haven't been able to leave yet. You're getting up and you're surviving every single day. And I want you to see the power in that. I want you to see that you have more power than you think you have. And you are not living just to be that person's emotional punching bag or physical punching bag. That is not the purpose of your existence. And if you're still getting up every day and choosing to face the day despite everything, that right there is a powerful statement in having agency over yourself. You're still getting up, you're still doing the thing, you're still saying life is worth it. And there is such strength in doing that, and I hope you see that, and I hope that as you see that, it can be a catalyst for other things that you can do to get yourself safe, and if you have children, to get them to a safe place. It's not going to be easy, and there's a strong possibility that after you leave your abuser, they're still going to be part of your life for a very long time, even especially if you have children. But I will say it is worth it, because if you stay, the odds of you ending up dead are pretty high. Even if whether it's from your abuser or it's by your own hand because you just can't take it anymore. If you leave, not only are you giving yourself a chance, but if you have children, you're giving them a chance to know what life is like without constant abuse, and you're all worthy of that. This is not what you were made for. And I hope you see that. You were made to do amazing things. And sometimes the amazing thing is just declaring here and now that I deserve better than this. And I'm going to find a way out. I might not be able to get out today or tomorrow or next week, but I'm going to find a way out because I am worthy of that. And if you're somebody who's hearing this and you're thinking, you know, these abusive behaviors resonate with you because you think you're the one, you might be the one perpetrating them, you're worthy of more too. This is not what you were made to be. Get the help that you need so you can stop hurting people. Because the people who trust you enough to allow you into their life, they don't allow you in there so you can abuse them. They don't let you in so that you can take everything wrong with your life out on them. And if you really value those people, like a lot of abusers say they do, get help. For both abusers and the ones being abused, understand this is not an anger management issue, because if it was, they would be taking these behaviors out on everyone they meet, yet they don't do that. They reserve it for the people they know they can get away with it. And usually it's a partner and their children. So it's not an anger management issue. It is a you problem for the abuser. It is the abuser's issue, 100%. They know how to manage their anger. And I'm tired of hearing people say it's an anger management problem. It's not. It's a choice. And it's one that they could choose to get help for if they wanted to. If you know somebody who's being abused, rather than criticizing them for staying, if it wouldn't put them in further danger, ask them what you can do to help them get out. Because if they've trusted you enough to allow you that glimpse into their life to know that they're being abused, I remember telling people just little snippets of what was going on in my life, hoping that they would be the one to say, how can I help you? You know, you're being abused, you need to get out. Nobody did that. I had to come to that realization myself. But the fact that I was telling people meant I trusted them enough to let them into this part of my life, hoping that they would throw me a lifeline and help me get out. That didn't happen. I had to do it on my own. But that's okay, because it made me a stronger person. But if somebody's trusting you enough to let you in, don't dismiss that trust. See what you can do to help them. I'm going to leave some resources in the description. I know I probably didn't talk about all this perfectly. I'm sure my language about domestic abuse was not executed perfectly. I'm sure that there are a lot of things that I could have covered that I didn't. But I hope you hear the general message here and you understand that it's not normal, it's not healthy, and it is in no way acceptable. I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.